Smile in my shoes, listen to my blues. I stand before you, resilient, stronger than power, soft as a flower. I know the hour, I am the times. It's the strength for me, it's the strength, it's the legacy.
Hello, and welcome to the April edition of Unerased Amplified. Well, for those who may not know it, April 22nd is Earth Day, and we have latched on to that theme, Mother Earth, ours to protect and cherish, for this show. And I'd like to invite all of you to join us to really embrace our role, our responsibility in protecting the planet, protecting our endangered, beleaguered planet. We will have two very important environmental warriors, Vernice Miller-Travis and former mayor of Flint, Michigan. Our show is being launched on April 25th, which is the 10th anniversary of the beginning of the Flint water crisis. And you'll hear more about that a little later. So I invite you all to join us to take in all of the content of the show. Thank you for watching.
As we mark the 10th anniversary of the Flint water crisis, we have with us today the former mayor of Flint, Michigan, Dr. Weaver. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. And thank you for inviting me. That was, when I hear you say 10 years.
10 years.
That still stops me. 10 years. Mm-hmm.
Yes. And looking back to when the Flint water crisis unfolded, you were just starting as mayor. So
exactly,
you were just in this position. So what was your first plan of action?
Well, I'll say what was good for me was I didn't go into the office not knowing that we had a water crisis on our hands. So that helped me. When I first started campaigning, that wasn't the issue. It was our illegal rates. We were paying 8 times the national average. But as time went on and the water switch took place, we were poisoned. So my plan of action, I had 2 things that I knew I was going to focus on. And one was declaring an emergency. And getting the attention, getting the resources, services, supports that the residents of this city needed and deserved as a result of what happened. And the second plan of action was to return home rule, because we were under an emergency manager. And that was more like a dictatorship. The mayor, the city council had no voice. Our voice didn't matter. Our vote didn't matter. So therefore, the people had no voice. So one of the things I said, I know I'm going to do 2 things. And that was to declare that emergency and work to return home rule to the people, because I always believed and still do that those that are elected to be the voice of the people should be the voice of the people, and not an emergency manager dictator that is sent in to take over our democracy and what takes place in the city.
That's right. And you were able to get funding from both state and federal.
We had to fight to get it from the state. We had to sue them to get the funding from the state. The federal government did end up giving us $100 million for pipe replacement. The state gave us about $97 million, but that was a result of taking them to court and suing them to get that. We got other money. We got over, probably $600 billion when you look at everything we got from the government. Philanthropy really came in and played a big role and helped us to reestablish and start building capacity, because I went into a mayor's office as a strong mayor with no staff. So philanthropy stepped in, other agencies stepped in, from United Way, the Red Cross, those kinds of places started helping. National Urban League, NAACP at the local, state, and federal level. So it was a good position to be in as far as getting that attention, because I knew if I was able to get the attention focused on Flint, that these are the things that would happen, and they did. The country paid attention.
Right. And earlier you gave pause that it has been 10 years. Do you have a sense of what the state of the water is now, 10 years later?
You know what? It's a sad state, because when I was in office, we had the Fast Start program. We had the fastest pipe replacement program in the country. We were a year ahead of schedule, 85 to 90% done. And to this date, the pipe replacement has not been completed in the city of Flint. It has not been completed, and the city is being held in contempt as a result by the courts, because that shouldn't be. So people in the city of Flint, many still don't have access to clean, affordable water because their pipes haven't been replaced. The other thing that keeps us from having access is, and this was something I was fighting for when I was in office, because we knew the water damaged not only the pipes that were outside of our homes, but it damaged the plumbing, the fixtures, the appliances that were inside of the home. And so while you may have pipes in front of your home being replaced, the water could be testing better. If you're in-home plumbing, your fixtures and appliances have been damaged by the lead, you still don't have access. So people are still buying bottled water. People are still using filtered water. And no one has gotten a dime from the settlement that everyone heard about. No one has been paid. And no one has been held accountable for the criminal activity that took place in this city. So that's where we are 10 years later. We're still in a crisis that has not been and could have been addressed and fixed.
Oh, my goodness. Now, you're a clinical psychologist specializing in children and family services.
Yes.
How did sharing the stories of the Flint residents, many of them Black mothers and children, how did that help push the cause forward, or not?
Well, I remember when we were talking about the water, and the people were out there, and they were pushing and letting everyone know. We were trying to let people know that there was something wrong with our water. And I remember getting my water tested. I got it tested by Virginia Tech because, we needed to know what was going on, and we could not get accurate, truthful, honest information from the state. And so I was one of the residents that had my water tested by Virginia Tech. And I remember it was a Sunday night. It was almost 10 o'clock, and they called me, and I said, wow, this is Virginia Tech calling. And I answered, and they told me about the high levels of lead that were in, the water in my home and other bacteria, and said we needed to stop using it immediately. Don't cook with it. Don't bathe with it. Don't even brush your teeth with it. And so while I was candidate for mayor, I remember having a press conference. And I said, I'm not really, yes, I'm candidate for mayor, but I'm having this as a clinical child and family psychologist. I have an ethical responsibility to speak out because I know firsthand the damage that this does to young developing brains. I know the services and supports that the family needs when their child has been impacted cognitively like this. I know the damage that it does for women that are nursing and pregnant moms. And so, I knew that level of information because usually lead is a pediatric problem. So I had to speak up and speak out about that because I said, here are the things that we can expect as a result. I automatically knew that the need for mental health services would go up. I knew that our special education rates would go up, that we'd have more children and young people in the juvenile justice system as a result of this. The impact mentally and emotionally that it would have on these mothers and really mothers, fathers, the families that their children had been damaged. We had mothers that had miscarriages and stillbirths as a result of this. And so I immediately knew the impact that it would have that way. What we didn't know, because like I said, lead tends to be a pediatric issue, was what it was going to do to our adolescents, to our young adults, to our seniors, to those with compromised immune systems, because it impacted this whole community physically, mentally, emotionally. This community had been damaged as a result of this lead poisoned water. So I had an obligation to speak up and speak out, and that was what I did.
And so we know that there are other Flints out there where, maybe it hasn't been exposed yet, places where there is unsafe water. In the last few minutes, what would be your call to action to people who want change, environmental justice, change, or change in general?
And you know what? That's a good question, because that was one of the things I knew. I said, this is bigger than Flint. I said, Flint became the poster child, but there are so many places all around this country, especially communities that look like us, that don't have access to clean water, where standards are old and outdated. We have an aging infrastructure. I said, what set Flint apart from those places was this was done to us and covered up by people that are supposed to protect and serve us. But Flint was going to be used as a model on how you approach other cities. And so I always told people, don't let us go through a crisis and not learn from us. Use us. Use us as your voice. Use us as a way to amplify what is going on and bring attention to your community. I said, because if this can happen to us under a national spotlight and we still haven't been fixed, think of what they will do to you not under a national spotlight. I said, so one of the things I always told people is the power of your voice. Use it, amplify it, because you can demand changes. Pay attention to what those water quality standards are. Demand that those be addressed, because they're old, they're outdated. Anytime 15 parts per billion of lead is acceptable for your water source, that's a problem. Mm-hmm. Anytime the amounts of bacteria are acceptable in your water source, that's a problem. So people need to speak up. They need to speak out. They need to look at who they're putting in office. They need to look at who they're, and how do we direct our young people into these career paths around water, around infrastructure, because many times we're not pursuing those career paths. There are so many tables that we need to be at, but never underestimate the power of your voice, because we had our grassroots people out there fussing about this water, holding up bags of brown water, bags of hair, showing their skin broken out, talking about damage that had been done to their children. We had galvanized the clergy. They had a big voice in helping us get this lawsuit. And so one of the things I've said is we need to start connecting these dots. It was not a coincidence that Flint and Jackson, Mississippi, or Flint and other places have a water crisis. And until we come together and be a bigger voice, and like I said, connect these dots. These are the things that will continue to happen in communities that look like Flint, that look like Detroit, that look like Jackson, Mississippi, that look like, Baltimore. All of these places where these things are happening, and the list goes on and on to some places we're not even aware of. So hold people accountable. Don't be scared to speak up, because if we don't speak, it doesn't change. We have an obligation and a responsibility to ourselves, to our community, to our children and our grandchildren to do this. And I just want people to never underestimate the power of their voice, because I went in office and they said I had no power. I said, I have my voice, and that's something no one can take from me. And I'm going to use it to let you know what's going on, because it's our news, whether it's good or bad news. It's how we make decisions about ourselves and about our families. So don't let anyone take that. Don't let anyone say what you cannot do. Do it and be about the business of it.
Thank you so much for your insight, your experiences, and for your leadership. Thank you for being with us today. And I wish you all the best.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
I guess my biggest thought is about pollution. What happens if we don't reduce the amount of pollution that is happening across our world? Like, what does that really look like? So, when I think about not resting well, I often think about if we don't put an end to this pollution problem or air quality. This has probably been one of the most significant years on record for North Carolina with pollen. And it's a struggle for people to just breathe and kids to go outside without the need of an inhaler. So, air quality and pollution are really the environmental issues that I put a lot of thought into and make me restless.
I think the environmental issue that keeps me up at night and during the day mostly is water. We can't live without clean water, and I don't think there's enough of an emphasis on what we need to do to keep our water clean, particularly our drinking supply of water. And, there's so much water pollution, so much plastic trash in our streams, our rivers, and certainly in the oceans. That's important, but just water resources in general. American understands how critical it is for us to have clean water. So that I'm thinking about it all day, every day.
Literally, what keeps me up at night is the environmental challenges of being Black in America. But also, figuratively, there's some things that keep me up at night. The multi-intergenerational trauma that comes from being Black outside. I look at so many of my ancestors and those that came before me and recognize the very real trauma that they had in being outside, whether that was working the land, whether that was trauma related to the water, trauma related to the woods. And as a result, we don't have a lot of Black environmentalists, just because what it means to be Black outside is a challenge.
That question I had to ponder on a bit because I honestly don't believe as individuals we can do a lot to combat this climate crisis. We do need to think about what we can do collectively and focus on family and community. So maybe even with gathering your neighbors and friends to start having shared spaces of community gardens and green spaces. I think we should lean more from thinking individualistically to holistically about what we can do to save, protect, and help our families and communities.
I am so glad you asked that question. The small acts that we can take to protect our planet is to read books about the environment and environmentalists. And I am talking about books that are very exciting, about exciting people like Rodney Stotts, who is nicknamed Bird Brother, and George Washington Carver, who was way ahead of his time. And then we have the Planet Walker, John Francis, and Wangari Maathai from Kenya, who planted millions of trees with the women in her community. So the final book I want to reference is a book I wrote called Say Their Names, about the 7-year-old's journey to respond to the George Floyd murder and protests. Yes, it's about Black Lives Matter. It's also about us being one with the environment and our need to protect all living things.
Oh, there's so many acts that we can take to protect our planet. One of the things, my big thing is food and water. Thinking about where your food comes from as well as where your food goes. That would include planting seeds. In the words of Ron Finley, grow some shit. Really to be involved in your local food system. And what does that mean? Again, whether that's growing, whether that's harvesting, being on, or even things that's like composting in your house, composting in your community is a huge act that can go a long way in terms of protecting our planet and protecting our environment. My favorite thing, go hug a tree. Like, I love it. Like, just go hug a tree. What it means to be outside and be grounded, I think you'll have a different relationship. It's a reciprocal relationship. Go hug a tree. I think that everything will change.
My gift to Earth would be real renewables. Renewables that make a difference, that make an impact, that work on cloudy days, windless days, and they don't leave a trace of residue.
And if I could leave a gift to the earth, it would be 1 million more young stewards of the planet. I spend my life working with young people on literature, literacy, and the environment. And I see how excited they are, how motivated they are about protecting nature and understanding their oneness with nature when we work together. And so I'm on a mission to grow as many nature stewards as possible. And if I could get to 1 million with the help of everybody listening here, that I would consider that a great gift.
So I say the gift that I'll leave behind would be definitely my children, my son, my 2 daughters, as along with the other seeds that I'm planting in so many different spaces as I continue to go and grow and blow up.
Well, it is totally a pleasure to be joined with an old friend and buddy from decades ago, Vernice Miller-Travis, who is a longtime warrior. She is a lawyer by training, a civil rights activist, an environmental justice activist, a policy analyst, and a Black woman who cares about the planet. Let's go back to 1991, October of 1991, and it was a historic gathering. Tell us a little bit about it, Vernice.
Folks from around the country, community-based leaders, organizers, faith-based leaders, indigenous leaders, folks that working at the community level, with some allies. But the call went out for folks to come together to begin to talk about the environmental threats and the public health threats that we were all facing. And what did we want to do about it? What did we want to do about it collectively? And how did we want to go back home and continue to build and work to advance this work, which we began to call environmental justice? And what we were fighting was the construct of environmental racism. And how did we want to take this work to the next level? We were all struggling at the individual community level about these issues. But the thinking was that if we came together, we could band together and we could build power so that we could advance some justice.
Fast forward to 2024.
Mm-hmm.
So the movement made some important strides, the environmental justice movement, which certainly the fingerprints of Black and brown people were what made it move. Where are we today? What are the gains? I want you to tell me very briefly, Vernice, what are the victories and what are the still the challenges that we face? Let's start with the victories.
Well, there's so many victories. There's so many victories. So people have, at the community level, people have litigated issues and they have prevailed. People have helped to inform or build public policy, legislation at the state level. People have helped to inform, change, strengthen public policy and legislation at the federal level. Right now, we see the strongest moment ever in the history of the United States federal government to lean in and focus on environmental justice at every level, in every agency, as directed by President Biden in several executive orders that speak specifically to environmental justice, to racial discrimination, to rooting out systemic discrimination within the federal government. There are several things, and a new executive order on environmental justice, which the president signed on April 22nd last year, at the White House in the Rose Garden, a Rose Garden signing ceremony for a new executive order on environmental justice, more powerful than the first from 1994, much more powerful. But perhaps the most important thing is establishing offices of environmental justice in the Department of Justice, at the Department of Health and Human Services, an Office of Energy Justice at the Department of Energy, at EPA, standing up a new Office of Environmental Justice and External Civil Rights, which is equivalent to all the other program offices at EPA. But here's the kicker, Gwen. That Office of Environmental Justice and External Civil Rights is distributing over $4 billion in grants to invest in frontline communities to address environmental threats at the local level. They also have rolled out a greenhouse gas reduction fund that's funded through the Inflation Reduction Act that President Biden got passed a year and a half ago, almost 2 years ago. That rolled out $20 billion last week to fund energy programs and equity issues at the grassroots level. Then the Department of Energy has billions of dollars going out the door. HHS has hundreds of millions. The Department of Transportation is investing $600 billion in infrastructure modernization, as well as looking at equity and justice issues and focused on disadvantaged communities and making sure we reach and invest in disadvantaged communities. And this administration has rolled out a policy called Justice 40 that mandates that 40% of most federal dollars that are going particularly towards infrastructure have to be spent in and on disadvantaged communities, and the benefits have to go to those communities. If I'm being completely honest, I would have to say that Joe Biden has turned out to be the most progressive president in my lifetime. So let me give you one last example about a victory. 2 days ago, so today is Thursday, the 11th of April. On Tuesday, the 9th of April, 2024, Michael Regan, the first Black man to lead the Environmental Protection Agency from Goldsboro, North Carolina, he announced with a bunch of environmental justice leaders from Louisiana, Texas, and a few other places, a new rule, a new regulation from EPA under the Clean Air Act to regulate stringently the emissions from chemical plants, particularly focused on Cancer Alley and the parts of Texas where EJ communities live cheek to jowl with chemical and petrochemical manufacturing facilities.
I want you to just really briefly, in the last couple of minutes we have left, Vernice, share what is the biggest challenge facing our planet regarding environmental degradation. You tell us.
Certainly climate change and trying to reduce carbon emissions that come from petrochemical production, the burning of gas, the burning of oil, the continued usage of carbon-based fuels and processes. All of that is choking us all. It's not just choking us as individuals where we live in our communities. It's also sucking the oxygen out of the oceans. It's having serious implications on our forest, which is why we're seeing so many more forest fires, and those forest fires are devastating. We're seeing species that are not able to continue to reproduce. So we're seeing a loss of species. We're seeing damage to our food supply. So we're seeing severe droughts and our inability to continue to produce food. And just in case anybody wants to know, a lot of the pressure from people coming from other countries to the southern border is not because people can't think of what to do in their own homes, but because they have faced such severe impacts from climate change that they can no longer produce food, and they can no longer produce food to feed their families. And if that is also happening in different parts of the United States, we're seeing massive flooding, right? We're seeing massive storms. We're seeing the warming of the oceans, the boiling of the oceans, right? All of this is coming to a head. And the one thing that we can do about it is to reduce our use and our dependence on fossil fuels. So that is one of the biggest challenges that we see. A part of that is also preserving our forests, the forest land that continues to exist. We got to fight with everything in our power to hold on to those trees, because those trees provide, not only a natural resource, but they provide an ecological resource in that they help to filter carbon out of the air, right? So that's why the fight around the forest, maintaining the forest in the Amazon is so important. The fight to maintain the boreal forest in the Pacific Northwest in Canada and in some parts of the Pacific Northwest in the U.S. That's why those fights are so important. And you might think, listening to this, that has nothing to do with me. It has everything to do with you, because if we cannot reduce our overall carbon emissions, all of us are facing dire threat, and we see it every day, right? So that's, I would put that on the front space. So you can think about Katrina, you can think about the flooding in North Carolina a few years ago, Hurricane Matthew. You could think about Superstorm Sandy that swept through New York and New Jersey and killed a whole bunch of people. You can think about the rapid warming of the oceans and therefore intensification of storms that are coming across every coast in the United States. Every coast. All of us who live in coastal communities are under threat. This is no joke. And I know we're struggling for survival and dignity in other spaces, but y'all got to put environmental justice at the top of your list.
All right, and that, to wrap this up, and it's got to be tight. Let's say we can do it in 2 minutes. I want you to give our sister friends, our audience, a call to action. Basically, you did a call to action just a minute ago, but I don't want to edit that. I want you to give us a call to action on environmental justice. What is it that we can do?
So when you think about the threats that we see coming at us around racial justice and the intensification of racial discrimination, you got to put environment at the top of that list, right? It's not just about access to jobs. It's not just about fair housing fairness, though that's an environmental justice issue too. It's not just about the things that we traditionally think of as racial justice issues. Environmental racism is real. Living in communities that have an abundance of contamination, not having access to clean and safe drinking water like Flint and so many other communities in the United States, not having adequate sewer systems and stormwater management systems so that we can protect ourselves when these intense storms come, not having access to a safe food supply, right? Not having fair housing and decent housing that has decent housing conditions, where the air quality inside is safe to breathe, where gas is not being pumped under and through our communities. These are just a smattering of what is a very long list of issues, but I promise you, there is nothing that you can do where you live that does not involve the environment. You got to breathe air, you got to drink water, you got to eat food, and you got to have safe shelter. And all of those things are fundamentally environmental issues. So y'all need to join us in this battle. When folks in your community raise up some issues, you need to go to those meetings. When you hear that your local planning board or your local community board is meeting, you got to go to those meetings. When you hear that your county emergency preparedness board, emergency planning is meeting, you definitely got to go to those meetings. How are we going to be able to protect ourselves when emergencies come right to our doorstep. This is a call to action for all of us. We can't act like it's about protecting endangered species, which it is, but the most endangered species that we're focused on is Black, brown, red, and yellow folk, and our poor and low-income white brothers and sisters. We are all in this together, and this is a fight for our survival. This is a fight, the fight of our lives. This is a fight to make sure that the generations that come after us have a better opportunity to live and thrive and grow where they are than we have had. And I can't think of anything that's more worthy of dedicating our lives, ourselves, our time to than that fight.
Wow. Well, with someone like you at the helm of environmental justice movement, I think that over time we will win. I want to thank you, my dear sister friend. It is always an inspiring joy to connect with you. Thank you for being with us today.
And Gwen, boy, is it a pleasure to have been your friend for 38, almost 40 years.
Well, we hope you have enjoyed the show. We hope you have gained something, learned something, drawn something from what we've offered. And we'd like to end with continuing our Her Story 365 with this featured video. While our focus has been around environmental justice, racial justice is part of environmental justice. And let's celebrate the women of Black Lives Matter. Take a look, and that's how we'll roll out. Have a good day or evening, and we'll see you again soon.
Sister friends were bound by the unity of social media and social justice. Alicia Garza, Patrice Cullors, Opal Tometi. United by a shared vision and collective anger to no justice, no peace, created a new hashtag that was transformed into activism that would captivate the world. Alicia, visionary leadership. Patrice, unwavering warrior. Opal, tireless advocate. Their three evocative words touched a stone that stoked a fire. Black Lives Matter. For Trayvon Martin. For Michael Brown. For Breonna Taylor. For George Floyd. Three sister friends challenged the status quo. They affirmed to the world, indeed, Black Lives Matter. Beyond headlines and hashtags, they matter because locked arms and shouting voices for people beaten but not broken. Three sister friends in solidarity and love inspired, insisted, and held up the enduring power of simple truth.